What's up guys, my name is Ace, and we just got a huge blog post from Treyarch detailing a ton of changes they've made between beta and launch for Cold War. And in today's video, I just wanted to go through these and focus on the important things, at least the things that really stood out to me. It is such a long blog post that I'm not going to read through every single point because first off, that would just be really boring listening to me read off patch notes. And second, I just want to keep the video relatively concise and focus on the things that really matter, or at least really matter to me and I feel will matter to you. So of course, if you want to check out all the little details, I will leave that linked in the description down below. So first up, we have additional modes, but this is just our standard modes that we would expect to see at launch. Nothing too surprising here. So they've added hardcore, for instance, and free-for-all, search and destroy, all that kind of stuff. Next, there were a bunch of changes to Fireteam Dirty Bomb. And I realize there's not a ton of interest surrounding this mode, so I am going to gloss over this section a little bit, but they've added ammo caches, which is great because I really found I was running out of ammo a lot throughout the beta while playing Fireteam. They've also added rappel lines to Alpine, and another key thing they've done here is they made it so you can now sprint while applying armor plates, which we weren't able to do in the beta. On top of that, when you're arming a bomb in Fireteam, now it will display a bar that shows your progress on arming that, and it will also show how many teammates are close enough to ramp up that planting speed. Then when it comes to loot, they added a radiation vest, which will protect you from any radiation damage. They've also added a bunch of the new streaks that we'll talk about later because they also added them to multiplayer. These are the combat bow, the VTOL escort, the cruise missile, and the gunship. And then they also adjusted the item spawn rates to reduce the frequency of getting those higher end Scorestreaks, which is great because I feel like there were just way too many chopper gunners while playing Fireteam in the beta. Then when it comes to the other vehicles like the Hind, the tank, and the FAV, they've reduced their frequency in this mode, so they're not going to be spawning as often, and that's also another positive, which really keeps things gun on gun. On top of that, for Fireteam, there were a bunch of other little tiny changes and bug fixes and stuff like that. Again, I don't want to get into too much detail with this mode because that's not really where my focus is, and I have a feeling most of you also care much more about regular multiplayer, so let's move into that. And first up, with the VIP escort mode, there have been several changes. They've now made it so there's an exfil notification that's triggered when the VIP just gets near that exfil helicopter. So when you get near that point where you have to extract the VIP, then there will be a notification for everybody on the map that the VIP has entered that area, which will just give the defenders a bit more time to get there and defend it. And I think this is a good change because there were several times in the beta where the VIP would just escort freely and it felt like defenders had no idea that that just happened. So now there's a bit more of a notification of that. Next up, in Combined Arms, which are those large-scale maps, we can now use parachutes. In the beta, we didn't have access to using parachutes, but we can now. Then getting into weapons, a bunch of the new weapons they've outlined here, the FFAR, which is a FAMAS, that has been added to the game, as well as the Bullfrog SMG, which I have seen some leaks of, which I'm not going to be sharing here on the channel, but it appears to be an early version of a PP-19 Bizon, which doesn't really fit with the timeline, but whatever, it's in there. Then we've also got an M60 LMG, the DMR-14, and the M79 launcher. There's also a plus more here, so I would expect more guns than just this. There have been leaks out there, which, again, I'm not going to get into the leaks in great detail here, but there are a few more guns aside from these that have been added as well, as far as we know. Now, as for weapon balancing, it looks like they have buffed a lot of the assault rifles up to the level of the Krig and the XM4 from the beta, and they've also increased the recoil of the AK-47. When it comes to SMGs, they've reduced their effectiveness at longer ranges. They didn't say exactly what they tweaked here, but they're less effective at longer ranges, which, as much as I love SMGs, that makes sense. Those things were way too powerful at longer ranges for an SMG in the beta, in my opinion. Then when it comes to LMGs, they've increased the LMG damage output, but they've also increased the aim down sight time. So a buff, but also a nerf. It seems like they're really trying to solidify the LMG's role as that super slow and clunky class of a weapon, but they deal massive amounts of damage that's going to be significantly better than the ARs and the SMGs. After that, with sniper rifles, they've adjusted the aim assist to feel smoother, yet require more skill and precision, which could mean a wide variety of things. I don't know exactly what that means they've done to it. Hopefully it feels better than what it felt like in the beta, at least. They've also slightly increased the aim down sight times of the sniper rifles. And also, the sniper scope glint is going to display more regularly. In the beta, it was actually fairly rare that I saw scope glint. Every now and then I'd see a little bit, but it seemed very, very inconsistent. So it looks like that's going to be much more consistent, and we're going to be seeing that glint more often. After that, for the pistols, they've decreased the hip fire accuracy for the burst fire pistol. And they've also reduced its maximum damage range. Apparently it was overperforming in the beta. Then when it comes to shotguns, the Gallo, that semi-auto shotgun, they've reduced the fire rate on that. For launchers, they've slightly boosted the damage at really close ranges, so if you're hitting really close to a target, it's going to be much more lethal than in the beta. And then finally, for the weapon balancing, with the combat knife, they've slightly reduced the sprinting speed on it, so you're not going to be able to sprint around quite as fast as before. Next up, something I'm really happy to see, and I'm excited to see how it feels. They have tuned aim assist. They just said that they've adjusted a number of the parameters with aim assist to provide more of an expected feel across weapon classes. So what I'm hoping this means with more of an expected feel is this is just going to feel more like Black Ops 4's aim assist, for instance, which is Treyarch's most recent Call of Duty game. I feel like aim assist in that game was just fine. I don't remember hearing any complaints about it being too powerful or not powerful enough. It seems like it just had that sweet spot, and I'm hoping that's what they found here as well, because that was definitely a big issue in the beta. It was a huge topic in the community. So I'm really hoping this just means that aim assist is going to feel more like the aim assist we're used to feeling in Call of Duty. Now, additionally, they said they made some adjustments to our aim down sight transition. They've made it smoother and more fluid, which is great. There were some aim down sight animations that were really choppy, and it seemed like they were dropping frames or something as you were aiming down sight in the beta and the alpha. And they've also adjusted the aim down sight sway for a more dramatic feel while reducing weapon rotation. So it seems like it's going to be more of a visual idle sway rather than actual idle sway that affects your aim. Then when it comes to attachments, I'm not going to go into every detail here, but basically they've added a bunch of attachments and they've also adjusted a bunch of the balance on the attachments in the beta. They said they did this to roughly half of the attachments that we had access to, which is nice to see. They've made a lot of changes. I'm sure they collected a ton of data throughout the beta, and this has allowed them to make those adjustments, so hopefully balance is going to be in a bit of a better place. Not that I thought it was terrible in the beta, but then again, we had limited experience with that. Next, they added dual wield to pistols, which I think is awesome. That's always really fun to just mess around with dual pistols, running around, just lighting people up. I'm really looking forward to trying those out. And they've also increased the weapon levels from level 40 up to level 55. So there's going to be a bit more of that weapon grind, which makes sense because they've also added a bunch of attachments. Now, moving on to movement, something I'm really happy to see is they've adjusted the sliding. So they've shortened the slide length and they've reduced the slide speed. This is excellent because in the beta, especially from a third-person perspective, when you saw somebody slide, it was almost like they were teleporting. And that just made it literally impossible to track somebody that was doing that. It was a really jarring experience, and good players really started to realize that they could take advantage of this really heavily, and it was like they were invincible as long as they kept sliding. So I'm excited to see what they did with this. Hopefully they didn't take it too far in the other direction and just destroy it. I hope they found that nice middle ground where sliding is still effective, but not a completely overpowered mechanic that you can exploit. On top of that, for movement, they've increased the speed for mantling on top of objects. So when you want to climb up onto an object, that's going to happen faster than in the beta. And that's good. It did feel a little bit on the slow side when I was playing in the beta, so I'm happy they've improved that. And now let's get into score streaks. They've added several new score streaks from the beta, which is expected. We have the combat bow, armor, which I'm a little nervous to see armor, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see how they end up balancing it. Maybe it won't be as bad as it sounds at first. Also, we have care package, cruise missile, a VTOL escort, and the gunship, which is an AC-130. The interesting thing, though, is this isn't all of the score streaks that were leaked a little while back, and more recent leaks have shown that they've actually cut some of the score streaks that were in the game a few weeks ago. And the key streak here that was missing from the leaked list was the HARP, or a VSAT or Blackbird-like streak. So it's like a super UAV where you have like the directional arrows and it shows enemies in real time. That isn't in this blog post, and it isn't in the recent leaks as well, so I'm a little worried that they cut that from the game. But I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. Maybe they're even planning on adding those streaks in later down the road. We'll just have to wait and see how things go here. Now, another thing with score streaks is they've made a bunch of adjustments to how much score you earn in various modes for various actions, just to better balance the earn rate of score streaks depending on the mode that you're playing. They also made it so the bonuses you get at a 10 kill streak and a 15 kill streak, those are going to be higher than they were in the beta, which is interesting to see because they were already pretty high, but now they're going to be even higher. And then they also just made a bunch of adjustments to the amount of score you need to get various streaks. As for individual streaks, with the attack chopper, they made it go from a 5-hit kill down to a 3-hit kill, so it's going to be more lethal when it's shooting enemies. but it seems like it's still going to be just as easy to shoot down because that wasn't mentioned here in the patch notes. And then on top of this, they nerfed the chopper gunner. So with this, it says they slightly reduced the duration and the damage of the chopper gunner. And I really hope they actually mean slightly here, because I like the chopper gunner being quite powerful. However, I will admit the duration on the chopper gunner was really long. I was really surprised to see how long a chopper gunner would actually stay in the air in the alpha and in the beta, so it makes sense that they toned that down a little bit, and hopefully they didn't nerf the damage too hard here. Now, another thing they did with the score streaks is they've played around with the values a little bit. They've improved the score event tuning and score streak earn potential across all modes. Now, another thing I'm excited to see with score streaks is apparently they've added a numerical display that shows the remaining score required to earn your score streaks. And this is something I asked for in the beta, and I'm really happy to see this, because in the beta, you could just see like the bar sort of filling up, and you didn't really know exactly how close you were to your streak. And that was one of the things that led to that feeling of score streaks just sort of come randomly. Like, you don't really feel like you're actively working toward them a lot of the times. They're just things that pop up from time to time as you're playing the game. Now you can better track that, and I think that'll lead to a bit more anticipation and excitement with your streaks. Also, they have adjusted the cooldowns, and they said this is to make for more interesting player choices and strategy, while also reducing low-end score streak spam. Now, this is fairly vague, but what I'm really hoping this means is they've either increased or kept the cooldown the same for the lower end streaks, like UAVs and counter UAVs, for instance, because I don't want those to be spammed all the time. But I hope that they've significantly reduced the cooldowns on the higher end streaks. Because since they are a higher end streak, a cooldown seems a little bit redundant, because even if you were to start earning your score immediately after finishing calling in that high end streak, you've still got a really long way to go to get to that streak again because of how the score streak system works. Like, you've got to build up a lot of score to get back to it. So why would you also need a cooldown on top of that? It just doesn't make too much sense to me. Now, moving on to spawns, they've just mentioned that they've made a bunch of general spawn adjustments across all modes, and they've also made a fix where the gunboats on Armada, they weren't actually canceling spawn points or making them an unsafe spawn when you had a line of sight on them. And there were some situations where you could spawn trap way too hard with the gunboats, and you could just literally look at a spawn point and keep spraying, and people would just keep spawning into your bullets. So apparently they fixed that, which is nice to see. Then when it comes to perks, with Flak Jacket, the damage reduction has been reduced by 5%, which is a bit confusing, but it sounds like they've actually nerfed Flak Jacket just a little bit, but only by 5%. Then on top of this, with Paranoia, they've updated the sound that you get when an enemy aims at you from outside of your field of view. As for equipment, a couple really nice changes here. First up, they've improved the frag throwback speed, so if you want to pick up a frag and throw it back, you will actually be able to do that in a reasonable amount of time, I hope at least, because in the beta, it took way too long to complete this action, and the frag would just blow up in your hand 9 times out of 10. Then on top of that, with the stim shot, they increased the cooldown time from 8 seconds up to 11 seconds, which I think is also a great change. I felt like in the beta, the stim shot was recharging way too fast, and it really easily became a crutch piece of equipment, in my opinion. And then with the decoy, they've actually nerfed it a little bit. The duration has been nerfed from 20 seconds down to 15 seconds, and they've also made it so the sound is a little bit easier to detect as a decoy rather than an enemy player, because in the beta, a decoy really did sound exactly like an enemy player, and until I got eyes on it, I didn't realize it wasn't an enemy player. But then moving on to field upgrades, the field mic got a bit of a nerf. This one had its radius reduced by 10%, and also its cooldown was increased from 3 minutes up to 3 minutes 30 seconds. Now, I don't know if this really solves the actual issue with the field mic. The issue that I had with the field mic is that it just lasted way too long. Like, once you place it, it seems like it would last the rest of the match unless an enemy player were to find it and destroy it. But in either case, there was a little bit of a nerf to it, and we'll just have to wait and see how that goes. Then, of course, they've also added a bunch of features, many of which are entirely expected with the full build of the game, but we've got like a combat record, for instance, in theater mode. We've also got finishing moves. Those have been added for the full build of the game, and weapon inspects. Those are also in the full build of the game. Now, finally, there's also a full section on audio, and it seems like they've done a lot of work to the audio between the beta and launch. Some of the highlights here, they said they've improved the weapon and footstep sounds. They've improved hit marker sounds and player damage feedback sounds. And then overall, the occlusion and the reflection of sounds off of objects, it seems like they've done a lot of work in these areas, so the sounds are going to be much more natural. And hopefully, like fidelity-wise, more like what Modern Warfare has, where when you fire a gun inside versus firing a gun outside, it's going to have a totally different sounding reverberation. But all of this is stuff we're just going to have to wait and see, or I guess wait and hear once the full build is officially launched. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for a bunch of the key changes that have been made between beta and the launch for Cold War. And overall, I think there's definitely a lot of great changes here, and I'm interested to see how it all plays out. But of course, I'd like to hear from you guys. Just looking at these changes that I outlined today, as well as the other changes they made in this blog post, what are you guys thinking about all this? Do you think enough has changed between beta and launch, or were you expecting more? Just let me know those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.